Hey guys, our friend Marshall Kosloff, he's going to be conducting interviews with experts and newsmakers for us here on the Breaking Points channel. We're really excited.
Yep, here it is.
Hey, Breaking Points. I'm joined by Peter Goodman. He's the author of Davos Man. We're here to talk about Davos, the World Economic Forum, and the big event, which is drawing a lot of attention, basically from everyone this week. Let's just start with a very basic question. What is Davos, and why is it on everyone's mind to the point where you wrote a book about it?
Well, it is a gathering of the most powerful people on earth. We're talking billionaires, heads of state, the odd celebrity, and they get together under this mantra, committed to improving the state of the world. They go up to the mountaintop in this otherwise unremarkable village of Davos to the Swiss Alps, committed to improving the state of the world, which is a curious phrase, considering that these are the ultimate beneficiaries of the status quo, and they would certainly like to keep it that way.
Okay, that's interesting. What basically are they saying then? Like, what is the area of focus that they're saying needs to be identified?
Well, I mean, they're always talking about the perennials like climate change. This year, they're talking about the war in Ukraine. They're talking about resetting capitalism to address inequality so that we can spread the benefits to more people. If you simply go by what happens in Davos itself, it's pretty unobjectionable. I mean, in terms of the official program, there are a lot of very brilliant people there. There are top academics who have all sorts of thoughts about things like climate change and racial and gender imbalance. And you can learn a lot if you're there. The problem is that the people who actually pay the bills, these are the billionaires, tech CEOs, finance CEOs, they use it as a way to signal their virtues to kind of protect themselves from those of us in democratic societies actually doing things that are meaningful to turn some of these words into action. Things like carbon taxes, regulations on emissions, progressive taxation to give governments the wherewithal to actually do the things that people want them to do, antitrust enforcement to deal with monopoly power. These sorts of things are discussed at great length, but guess what? Nothing ever really seems to change, and that doesn't seem like an accident.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about benefiting from the status quo. I'm glad you talked about the topic du jour this year, obviously, which is the war in Ukraine. I know there are listeners who are thinking the weapons industry benefits from that status quo. Sure. That isn't really the type of folk or the type of industries that really go to these type of places. You focus on people like the founder of Salesforce. It's more just finance, technology, those aspects of it. So how would you define them as benefiting from this?
But finance is hugely important. I mean, what's our strategy to end the war in Ukraine? It's to turn up the heat on the oligarchs and this is debatable, but with the assumption that if we upset the oligarchs, we make it hard for them to access their playthings like their yachts, and they're worried about what happens to their wealth. That will put pressure on Putin to then relent. Well, we have to deal with our own oligarchs. I mean, the people in Davos, including Steve Schwarzman, who's one of my 5 primary characters in my book. This is the world's most successful private equity magnate. They have lobbied over years to maintain private equity as a secret preserve. I mean, the US is the ultimate offshore banking center if you set aside traditional banking and you focus on things like private equity, which is exempt from all the sanctions. We don't have any idea who's investing in private equity. And that's not by accident. That's because private equity itself benefits when there's no audit trail and there's no ability to cut off people who are bringing their ill-gotten gains. We are protecting our own oligarchs against the bite of these sanctions that might otherwise create pressure on Putin's oligarchs.
You know, it's interesting. You're talking about how you have this system where folks are benefiting and they have their power, but there are also conspiracies that come out about Davos. You know, the Great Reset. You'll get a clip that goes viral. Can you just comment on that aspect of it without losing our monetization?
I'm not a big conspiracy guy, and I think it's really overdone. I think in a weird way it actually helps the forum by reinforcing the relevance of the World Economic Forum by claiming that it's this like secret society that's making all the rules. Now, don't get me wrong. It is a gathering of the most powerful people on earth, and they will do what they do when they gather, which is to do deals outside of the scrutiny of annoying people like journalists or regulators. In that sense, it is significant. I have been told by billionaires that they can see more people in 4 days in Davos than they might see in 6 months of flying around the world. But I'm just using it in my book as a kind of like watering hole on our safari, right? Like I'm interested in this species of Davos man, a species that really is separate from the rest of humanity. Their experience is just different. And where do we go on safari to go see game? Well, we go to the watering hole. That's Davos. It's one of many watering holes. It happens to be a really significant one. Everybody's there. It's not that the rules are promulgated up on the mountaintop and handed down. In fact, it's the opposite. I mean, all of the agreements and the pledges, they rarely amount to anything. I mean, the forum now is talking about how it's so significant because it's the birthplace of Gavi, this international vaccine alliance that's supposed to have prevented exactly what has happened, which is tremendously unequal rates of vaccination against COVID-19. There's a lot of talk of COVAX, which Gavi is part of, completely failed. I mean, it's succeeded as a kind of source of press releases so that pharmaceutical companies can say, hey, we've taken care of this. You don't have to stick us with rules. You don't have to violate our intellectual property, the World Trade Organization. We will solve this. That's, it hasn't happened. So I don't think it's that Davos is so important in terms of the rulemaking. It's what Davos signifies. It's the billionaires saying, we've got this, don't stick us with antitrust enforcement rules to allow labor to organize so they can get a piece of the action, progressive taxation. It's the antidote to those of us in democratic societies actually using our democratic rights.
And this goes to, I think, your correction on, aside from the lack of factualness to make up a word when it comes to the conspiracy theories, it's misidentifying where the problem there is. Because like put a note on this, which is the issue from your perspective is that what laws are being passed in Washington. It doesn't matter that a blowhard billionaire is giving a big speech at a conference with other blowhard billionaires. That is not actually the center where a lot of these problems or solutions could really be adjudicated. But that's how I just sort of see that there. So something I'm curious about is how has, especially this year, the World Economic Forum and Davos itself responded to the past 2 years, not in terms of just like the COVID, but the criticism from folks such as yourself, the conspiracies, like whether obviously the conspiracies aren't true from our perspective, but I would say that Davos feels controversial in a way it hasn't before from a couple of different directions. How are they responding to that?
I think they're responding to that by doing what they always do, which is co-opting the language of the people who are criticizing. So doubling down on talking about inequality, talking about the need for more bountiful capitalism whose gains are shared more widely, doubling down on talk of the pursuit of solutions to the pandemic and vaccine inequality. They ignore their critics by making criticism part of their own talking points. And it's very effectively done. I don't see a great amount of change. In fact, I was struck by seeing some analysis, I can't remember where it came out, showing the great relevance of Davos because suddenly there are more pledges than ever. Boy, if there's one thing we've got enough of, it's pledges and reports. I mean, if you just read all the reports that the World Economic Forum put out, we'd be much more enlightened. They hire top-notch people to dig into important issues. And then it just gets put out as a press release. It becomes the basis for some panel discussion. And then meanwhile, the people who actually matter at Davos, these are the people paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for forum memberships. They ignore the proceedings and they meet in private suites where they don't have to disclose what they're discussing. I mean, the members of monarchies that control oil assets can meet with CEOs of fossil fuel companies and they can do what they do, which is perpetuate the status quo.
So help the audience here. Like you said, what makes this difficult to adjudicate is they will use language, Mark Benioff writes a book critiquing capitalism. Right. So how should viewers judge the seriousness of these statements, the seriousness of their approach? How do you separate the Davos speak, as you call it, from just actual serious confrontation with issues?
Follow the money. And don't get me wrong. If billionaires want to engage in philanthropy, if they want to run their companies so that they're more generous to their employees and they make their companies better places to work, good for them. If they want to boost their diversity in terms of hiring and representation of their workforces, That's all good. I mean, I'm not here to say they shouldn't do those things. My book argues that we can't count on those things as a substitute for rules that are handed down through the process that we can actually count on, and that's democracy. So if billionaires want to give up some of their fortunes to make it easier for people to get PPE in a pandemic, or to boost vaccine access, or make it easier for girls in the developing world to go to school, great. But we still need progressive taxation, antitrust enforcement. We need collective bargaining. We can't fall for the vows as a substitute for real action. And I frankly don't even think there's that much value in truth squatting all the claims, because I don't come from this standpoint that, the end game should be make Davos man live up to Davos man's rhetoric. I don't want to live in a world where I'm waiting for the real white knight to come in and solve all of our problems. The solution to our problems is democracy itself. It's going to require the mobilization of people in major democratic societies to use the levers of democracy to get the things they want for themselves. And that's going to require things like progressive taxation to get the resources. Go ahead, have Davos, and let's just see what comes of it, but let's not put any stock in it as the solution to our problems.
I guess my last question, and this is something I was just thinking about having actually read the book. What is the limits of Davos man's power? So an example of this would be Michael Bloomberg. He's the ultimate example of Davos man, I think, on a couple of different levels, even
Sure.
runs for president. He spends billions of dollars on gun control legislation. If you're a center left to left person, you're likely happy with and agree with the way he's putting it, but the legislation didn't advance. So I'm just curious, thinking of that example and just other related ones, like what are the limits of their power relative to democracy, whether you agree with their individual policies or not?
That's a really interesting question. I would say their power in terms of perpetuating the status quo seems right now to be just about unlimited. It's very easy to defeat legislation in a democracy that's awash in campaign funds. In the US, we're living under Citizens United. We've got massive social media campaigns. Think about, the power of Amazon having come through the pandemic now with one of its plants unionized by Christian Smalls, this labor leader who was actually fired for staging a walkout in the worst months of the first wave of the pandemic. We know that Christian Smalls has managed to score the significant victory. We also know that Amazon last year produced a bunch of television spots and put them out on social media and insinuated them into mainstream television coverage as, regular local news spots, in which they interviewed warehouse workers saying how, we're so happy and we're protected and we're part of this great enterprise. The capacity of Davos man to influence public opinion and tie up attempts to alter the status quo, not unlimited. Christian Smalls taught us that, but it's pretty formidable, and it's going to require continued mass mobilization for us to get what we want.
Man, to wrap this, I actually really appreciate that last answer, because you helped me better understand your point. Because your point isn't that Michael Bloomberg could magically change the status quo on gun control. Tom Steyer can't change the climate change status quo. The point is that they still economically benefit from that status quo, and that underlying reality seems to be the problem. Is that a good way of summing up what it is?
Yeah, I think that's right. We come full circle, committed to improving the state of the world. Well, when you're the ultimate beneficiaries of the status quo, how much change are you really in the mood for? And that's what we see time and again. The power structure gets replicated, and these attempts that we see at Davos to talk about stakeholder capitalism, new ways to organize companies so that the bounty is shared more widely. All this stuff, it's like unilateralist rhetoric. It's not a change in the power structure. And ultimately, we have a lot of people who recognize that they don't have power, and they're angry about it, and they're willing to embrace often extremist and nonsensical solutions to very real problems. And it's the power structure itself that has to be altered so that we actually do have a democracy.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us on Breaking Points. The book is Davos Man, and unfortunately, regardless of the week, it is going to be relevant and apply. So definitely check it out.
Thank you so much. Great to talk to you.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.